of all, I just am so honored to have the governor and the deputy governor from Samaria to come and visit me in my office here in Washington, D.C. That is a tremendous honor and a great pleasure. And it didn't take long before we developed a very quick friendship. And from that, we got down to frank discussions. And I was very disappointed to find out that the European Union is actually boycotting factories, businesses in Israel. And what's even worse about that is that half the people, in some cases, that are suffering from that are Palestinians themselves, which is ostensibly the reason for having the boycotts. So I learned a lot, but we have a lot more to learn. And what I advise my friends to do, the entire delegation that came in today, is to give us more information. Help me help Israel, my friend Israel. And so the more information I can learn, the more I can speak out on the subject. Mr. Waller brought up the question of having a summit or an event here in the future in Washington, D.C. I think that's an excellent idea. It will highlight the problem and understand that if you want peace, then you have to have two people coming together willing to have peace, not inflicting economic or physical injury on each other. And so finally, I guess I would say in summation that I continue to support Israel. My entire office does. We support Israel remaining a Jewish state. We support Israel in maintaining its borders, its strategic borders that are so necessary to protect Israel from foreign invaders and terrorists and all of the threats, and you know there are many of them. We also support Israel in protecting Israel against nuclear threats, specifically Iran, but any others that may arise. So I think what we learned today and what we reestablish is that I am a true friend of Israel, and I know Israel is a true friend of us, and I look forward to working with the people of Israel towards solving many of these problems, and hopefully we're going to have peace in the future. I can tell you is I don't believe in preconditions unless they're bilateral preconditions that have been agreed upon certainly before they sit down to the table. It's my understanding there has been no precondition set. I don't agree that Israel should stop growing its population and building in its own territory as a precondition to any negotiation. I mean, let's face it, if two peoples, the Palestinians and the Israelis, if they really want peace, then they will sit down and they will, if both sides really honestly want peace, then they will get peace if they sit down together. I am convinced that Israel wants peace, and I am convinced that Israel is willing to compromise, not in a way that would hurt it as a Jewish state or that would hurt its borders to protect it. But I think there are many compromises that have been suggested. On the other hand, I don't hear of any compromises coming from the Palestinian people. And I think that even though the leadership of the Palestinians continue to want to keep disruption and some level of anger and hostility, I think the average person really wants to seek peace. And that's what I would ask, is that the Palestinian people themselves, the rank and file, not the leadership, be allowed to have a voice in that process. And the best way to do that is through democracy. We have a democracy here in the United States. As you know, we have maybe the first significant sized democracy in the world. And Israel, modern Israel, beginning in 1947-48, developed a democracy too. And it's been so effective. We ask the Palestinian people, let the people speak either directly or through their representatives. And I think we'll have peace. I think democracy is a key to it, and also a willingness to do that. And I think foreign nations should only support these peace talks. I don't think any foreign nation or the European Union or anybody should be creating any sort of retribution or in some way boycotting or hurting economically any country in the name of peace.
Well, I think when you start to try to affect foreign policy by trying to boycott businesses in Israel, to say to them, give up your land a strategic location as well, land that would be used as a base for missiles, that would be used as a base for attacks against Israelis. We've seen this before. We've seen it in the Golan Heights, we've seen it in the Gaza Strip, we've seen it out of Lebanon. And Israel has had to fight to defend themselves from annihilation, and when they did so, they were forced to take land that was strategic locations. This land is a strategic location, and if it were to be handed over, then it would be used as a base to try to annihilate Israelis. And it is wrong for people in Europe to put the safety of Israelis at risk because they have a political agenda that they likely do not understand. Well, to turn people out of prison that have blood on their hands means that invariably innocent people will bleed at the hands of those who were released that do have blood on their hands today. I think strategically it's a wrong thing to do. It sends a wrong message. It says that you can terrorize and be rewarded for terrorism. And then furthermore, I think it's important for our country, the United States, to step back and take a new look at this idea about a two-state solution. I don't think they're looking very far into the future if they think that can work. Show me how giving up the Gaza Strip was part of a solution, and show me how giving back, say, the Golan Heights would be part of a solution. We saw the missiles coming out of Lebanon. They were smuggled in, they were hidden in homes, and how difficult it was for Israelis to suppress the constant missile fire. And they have to be able to live in peace and safety and security in their homes. Israelis are a peaceful people. They're not an aggressive people. By the way, Jews have lived in that part of the world, especially in Judea, since antiquity. And for anyone to argue that Jews should no longer live in a place they've always lived since the beginning of the population of this planet, it's utterly wrong to take that position, and you can't deport 700,000 Jews out of the West Bank.
Rather a shame that either Europe or the United States would put pressure on Israel to make even further concessions, because Israel is the only one that has ever made any concessions. And as has been said before, if the Palestinians will quit teaching hate and lay down their hatred and their arms, there'll be peace. If the Israelis lay down their arms, there'll be no Israel. So we're pushing on the wrong people. There should be no demand for going back to pre-67 borders. There should be no demand of boycott of Israeli goods, because those are Palestinians. Those are Muslims that are working in Israeli factories. They're the ones that are losing their jobs. They're the ones that are having a difficult time. And it is true in Israel that the Muslims in Israel, both in the former Samaria, Judea, they get to vote. And they don't get to vote everywhere in the Middle East. And I'm hoping that what was actually an Arab nightmare, not an Arab winter and not an Arab spring, may be replaced, at least in Egypt, where people are coming out in the millions saying, we want to live at peace with Israel, we want to live in peace with Christians and Jews, and we don't want radical Islamists running our country. That's encouraging to me, and I wish that Europe and the United States would notice that people of peace want to get into power, but they're being pushed to the side by European leaders and American leaders, and we owe so much to Israel, and we need to assist them and not try to push them into a situation that will be just irreconcilable.